We up audio and video?
It looked like it.
All right. So Shabbat Shalom. If you noticed, I titled this The Dialogue for the Chosen, but I should put a comma or something. It's dialogue. It's for the class, The Chosen. Like, see, because people are like, well, I don't know if I'm invited in. Of course you're invited in. Did you listen to the class? So anyway, this is the section of our service where we have a discussion. We have a discussion about what we talked about, the Torah reading. We talked about Torah reading Akev and about the idea of chosenness and the Segulah, the special treasure, and how you're commanded to be holy because God is holy. And it's just that easy. I mean, all we have to do is be holy and chosen. And, well, how do you feel about that Torah reading? Anything stand out in anybody's mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've always liked Deuteronomy myself as well. The thing is that grips me when I read it is being in the first person, because it has more of a look. I was talking to God, and this is what He said.
Yep.
It's not like, well, you know, somebody's writing about something that other people did.
Yep.
Because there's always the element of you have another version in there, another opinion, another filter.
Yep.
So, but, you know, when you're writing it down, you know, I was talking to God this evening, and He said, and I said, and,
yeah.
you know, now I'm telling you people, you know, and that's, so it's, when you've got that, and it's pretty plain, I mean, there's a couple of things you can go, well, what does this word mean, or what does that mean? I don't really understand that, but overall, it's hard to say. It's in such plain language. It's hard to say, well, I don't really understand. You either take it or you don't.
Yep. So Pat Brockman asked, what translation am I using? And I generally, I'm teaching from the Koran Hebrew English edition of the Tanakh. And I've posted this a few times. I'll post it again. I'll make a little list of notes, but I'll post this again so that people can get a copy. And I usually get mine through Amazon, and you can buy it on Amazon Smiles. And so Koran, I'm going to put a note to post that. But what I often do, though, is even though I'm using this English translation, it has the Hebrew side by side. And quite often what I'll do is I'm looking at the Hebrew or English. So sometimes I'm sort of translating as I go. I might be, you know, looking at the Hebrew. But that's what's good about it, is it has the Hebrew and English side by side. And the white spaces, which I often refer to in my class. And I think that's very important. Now, you mentioned this idea that Deuteronomy presents itself in the first person, and I've been working on a project for quite a while now, just, you know, to really explore that. And I've always liked Deuteronomy. That's one of the reasons is it's written in that particular style. But the other point about it that ties into what you said is in Deuteronomy chapter 1. In the introduction, I believe in verse 5, it says, and Moses set out to make the teaching plain. And then we get the story. The Lord spoken to me, whatever. So the idea is that Deuteronomy is, in a sense, it's the words that Moses gives prior to the children of Israel, after the Exodus, but prior to them going into the land, after the 40 years before they enter into the conquest of the land. And so it's presented as a series of talks to the children of Israel to prepare them right before they take possession. So it is very important. And there are things that you would expect to be mentioned that aren't mentioned. They're mentioned elsewhere in the Torah, but not necessarily in Deuteronomy. But what I really like is that Deuteronomy uses these phrases that are not always used in other books of the Torah, and sometimes it's very unique language only used in Deuteronomy. The classic example that I've taught on before is 9 times there's a phrase repeated, with all your heart, with all your soul. Only Deuteronomy. No one else mentions this. The love of God is not mentioned in the Torah except in Deuteronomy. Now, what we think, we read these passages in Deuteronomy, and a lot of times we say, you know, the Torah says this, and quite often some of the most beautiful passages, you know, that we think about are coming from Deuteronomy. Doesn't mean there aren't beautiful things in Genesis through Numbers, but quite often I find that as some of our most well-known and quoted passages do come from Deuteronomy. It's this first person Moses giving it back, so to speak. So this idea of being chosen and a segulah, what are your thoughts on some of that?
One of my initial thoughts is from whose point of view are we talking about here? It's one thing to say, I am chosen. It's another thing for somebody else to say, he is chosen. So that's kind of where it seems to me like everything's in the first person that we're talking about is that we're chosen. Is there, and I'm sure there is somewhere in the scriptures where it says they are chosen. You know, I'm sure there's an example of maybe a battle or something, but that's my question.
When others are looking and say they're the chosen?
In other words, like I say, it's one thing to say I'm chosen.
Yeah.
But for somebody else to observe and say he is chosen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm just an innocent bystander here.
Right. Right.
So that was kind of
well, one of the things that we do get that's a good point is that at times people recognize that God's favor is on Israel. It could be their enemies. It could be neighboring countries, to your point. Because, you know, if I just say, well, you know, I'm Israel, I'm God's chosen, yeah, that doesn't come across so greatly. But we have, according to the text, where God says, this is my chosen, Israel's my servant, Israel's this, Israel's that. And then we have places in the text where neighboring countries and others will look to Israel. And remember now, the goal is not that Israel tells everybody they're the chosen. The goal is that Israel lives up to being chosen, so that people will look at them and say, what a great and wise people this is. A wise and understanding people is this, whose God is so close that he answers when they call. That's the goal. The goal is not to say, you know, don't rejoice, if you will, that you're chosen. The goal is to rejoice that you've been given this opportunity to represent God in a way that's pleasing and that ultimately will bring blessing to the world. So that's the key.
Janelle made a statement.
Yeah.
Like, it requires diligence, and when you're set apart, you have to lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
The standard is higher.
That's right.
So it's not a matter of, like you're saying, boasting. Oh, we're the chosen. We are the champions.
Yeah.
No, it's to lead by example.
It seems like the sentence needs to be finished. You were chosen. Chosen for what?
That's right.
I think if you express what you're chosen for, then it's not as bad.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound as bad.
Yeah.
kind of like the example of, sandlot baseball and stuff where you got people, you pick a captain and they start choosing the teams.
Yep.
You got that last guy standing there that doesn't get picked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it an example of the guy that never gets picked, he gets picked first?
Right, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, it's the person that doesn't raise his hand. I'll be the chosen. And see, that's the image that we get in the biblical text, is that those who are chosen didn't really ask for it. Like Moses, Moses in fact says, could you send somebody else maybe? I don't speak well. Get the examples that we see in Scripture. Jeremiah, same thing. I'm just a child. What am I going to do? Amos says, look, I'm a cowboy. I was taking care of the sycamore trees, and Yehovah told me to come tell you this message. You get mad if you want, but I don't have a choice in the matter. See, the idea is that generally people don't run around and say, I'm the chosen. But biblically, it's important to note what God says about being chosen and what responsibility is attached to that. So to whom much is given, much is required, you might say. If a group of people are chosen, then they're chosen for a specific task. And what task is that? To be a light to the nations, to be a servant of servants. And ultimately, by doing that and living that life, ultimately they will be exalted and so forth. But it's...
And then once they're picked, the spotlight gets on, so everybody's looking at them.
That's
So,
right.
You know, it's not necessarily a great thing to be chosen.
That's right.
You know, you can actually accomplish more sometimes otherwise. But
Yeah.
there you go.
I know
The
people...
Spotlight's on you.
I know people who've joined a religious group and they said, look, in my last association, I was the music leader, I was the whatever, I was the cantor. I just want to be invisible here. I want to, go in and not be seen, because there is a great responsibility for people who are in leadership. We see this all the time when someone does something unethical in business and that's spotlighted, Whereas plenty of people do bad things, but it may or may not be highlighted in the news. So with responsibility, with exaltation comes great responsibility. And God's purpose in lifting them up is so that everybody, it's like, think of Job. Think of Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him, I mean, when you think of...
There's the spotlight.
Yep.
Yes.
And then everybody around go, oh, really? Well, let me look.
Something
ahead.
must be wrong.
Miriam Cormier,
Yep.
Cormier, as we say down here, says, I know Jehovah chooses whom he will, but can a person choose him?
Yes.
And, I guess my question to that, Miriam, is what makes a person want to choose him to begin with if he is not doing the drawing in your heart? It seems like if you even think and consider the things of Jehovah, something's going on there where he's either wooing you or opening your eyes or giving you this chance to respond to him.
The beauty of the biblical message, I could say it like many are called but few are chosen. Here's the idea. God ultimately desires, Ezekiel 18, Ezekiel 33, the idea is that God desires that no one should perish, basically, but that all, see, this sounds like a preacher might present it, but the idea is that you would be, that all would come to this knowledge that there's one God. He excludes the worship of other gods, this idea that you are to serve Him and serve your fellow man. If someone truly desires to serve God, they've got this whole package to accept. Doesn't mean you have to get it all right at once, but you begin to walk in accordance to the teaching. That's choosing God and His way, see? And then ultimately, Isaiah 56 talks about it's anyone who takes hold of the covenant. It's not just Israel, it's anyone who would take hold of the covenant. Malachi says those who think on the name, who speak often one to another. This book of remembrance is written before him. And when he makes up his segulah, ultimately it's going to include all these people. Isaiah 19 says, Egypt and Assyria are called my people. These are the bad guys. Biblically, these are the ones who destroyed Israel, but yet God says, these are my people.
For a specific reason.
For a specific reason, yep.
Well, the message that Jehovah has set Israel apart is to draw everyone else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he designs it so that the opportunity is there for the whole.
Yeah. You're right. Israel is chosen to be a model of excellence. Ideally, if Israel lived up to its calling, the people of the other nations who are not Israel, clearly, would look at Israel and say, what a wise and understanding people. I want to be like them. How do I do? Well, you just attach yourself to the covenant. Abram was not Jewish. He wasn't even Israelite. This is very important. Noah is not Israelite. He's not. They come before all that. Enoch walked with God. How did these people attach themselves to the one God? It says in Hebrew, it's hithalek. They cause themselves to walk with God. And when a person, regardless of their DNA or genetic makeup, when a person chooses to walk with God and attach themselves to the covenant, they become one of the Segula, basically.
The idea of in the military, now we have a volunteer army. You go in.
Yep.
As opposed to a draft where you're chosen. You know, that's kind of where I'm looking at this. You know?
Yep.
But, you know, it's the same result anyway, because once you're in, you're in.
Yep.
In other words, you have to obey. You have to.
Right.
You can't say, "Oh, well, I just volunteer because I'm leaving."
Yeah.
But I mean,
And the rules aren't different.
the rules aren't different. That's, you know, except maybe you go in the army. You probably know more about that. You can volunteer for the army. You can join
Yep.
the army. But
Yep.
when you're drafted, you're in the army.
Yep.
Well,
As I
well,
understand it.
yeah.
Yeah.
No auditing
back during-
classes.
Back during the 60s and 70s, you went to the AFE station, it was count off 1 through 4.
Yeah.
1 was like Army, 2 was like Navy, 3 was
Okay.
Marine Corps, 4 was Air Force, and they went down like that.
Okay.
Depending on
What
their
they
needs,
need,
what
what their
quota
needs
they
were.
needed at the time.
I got it.
But now, like you say, you can volunteer, and people can volunteer. That Isaiah 56, Joe Dale quoted it as well.
So even when you do volunteer, they still have to choose you.
Yeah,
You know, they can say, "No, we don't want you."
Yeah. yeah.
They can still choose you. So you're still chosen.
Well, there are things associated, and that's the purpose. To your point, that's the purpose of the classes. Yes, but there are conditions. God says, I have picked this group and assigned them a specific task. And now a person can opt out. A person can choose not to be chosen. A person, in the sense that they don't have to obey and follow through with what, they could say, oh, I don't want to be holy.
Yeah, free
I'm going to let you have a choice. And see, Deuteronomy's real big on this choice. You have a choice between life and blessing, death and cursing. Choose life.
That's kind of where I'm at on that is the word if. It seems like the scriptures say if they do this, they'll be great and blessed, and all the world will love them and everything. So, I mean, obviously that if hasn't completely, no, I have to be careful how I say this. In other words, if they obey, obviously the obedience is 100% at this point.
Right. Right.
So that going that way, I guess you could say, how long would that
Y-
take?
Yeah, because you have two things going here. You have God says, look, I made a promise.
Yeah.
I'm going to fulfill.
You get 100%, 91%.
Yeah, I'm going to give to some degree. This blessing is going to be worked through this conduit. And we know from other stories in the Bible, like when Abraham is interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. What if I have this many? What about this many? What about this many?
I found it interesting that I don't remember I didn't write down the note what scripture it was. He was talking about the curses, 4 generations or whatever.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the blessings was, what was it?
1,000 generations, yeah.
Which is how long?
Yeah.
I think somebody, I think,
Long time.
Yeah.
1,000 generations. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like 20 years, 25, 40 years, whatever.
Yeah, however you define it.
40 years is 40,000 years.
Yeah, yeah.
How long we into it now?
Yeah, so the idea, and people have made a big deal out of that. They go, well, look, you've got the blessings that are to the 1,000th generation.
Right.
You've got the curses to the 4th. What is that,
Kind of says something about us there.
Yeah. So it's, God is he's called long of patience, what is it, how's the English say it?
Long-suffering.
Long-suffering, and not willing. He doesn't want people to choose wrong. He sends all the time messengers who say, look, just follow the way. But I really do.
40,000 years.
I hear people all the time say, well, you just can't do it. You can't. And what I say is, no, people won't do it. There are some things that you can't do right now if you set out to follow Torah as it's written. But there are plenty of things that you can do. And some of these moral and ethical things are very important, and they're incumbent upon all humanity. And it's our job as people of the book, I think, to share that lifestyle and to share that life with those around us. And not so much by preaching it, you know, in the supermarket. That could be okay, I guess. But really, it's by example. You know, it's how do we live our life day to day. If a person says, I think I'm one of the chosen, like says it to themselves, not like in the post office. I think I'm one of the chosen. People go, well, you're still waiting behind me, buddy, because I was here first. But the idea, though, is that if a person feels that way, they need to know that attached to being chosen is this command to be holy. And it says, be holy because I'm holy. And I think that's the piece. A lot of times we know everyone says, well, God's holy. Sure, God's holy. But he commands his people to be holy as well. And that's what's important, I think.
I think the thing with some of the folks that, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but some of the folks that would say, you know, I can't do that. I can't live up to those things. Is that if you read what's expected, and somebody would say, well, I don't know if I can I don't know how good I am if I could, like for instance, keeping holy the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a lot of interpretation there as to how that's done, or what level, and we've had those discussions before. Yeah, we've had those discussions before. But, you know, so when people say, well, it's just not possible. Well, I like to think that, you know, we all have different talents and skills. That's why if we all have easels up there and everybody gets up to paint a picture, somebody's going to be better than the others.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while a Michelangelo will pop up.
Right.
So God knows what our level of ability is and knows how we're striving. So here's the blueprint, here's the objectives, and he knows when you're living up to expectation, your capabilities, when you're not. So the thing is, well, I couldn't possibly do that. Well, going back to what you said, you can or you won't. So if you will, and you go, it doesn't mean that just because somebody else is better at it than you are, that you failed.
Yeah.
He knows the difference.
Well, the other thing that's sort of a catch for people is they feel like they have to possess certain skill sets in order to be used by God to do a certain thing, you know, like, but Moses, for instance, I imagine Moses not being, we were joking during the break that you said, well, Charlton Heston will always be Moses to me. And I would agree. I mean, he's got that great voice, he's just articulate, but the biblical account seems to indicate that Moses was not. And but it wouldn't have been a good movie maybe if you had someone with a really difficult speech impediment.
Voice, maybe.
That stuff.
Kind of like
you know,
the patent thing I was talking about,
right.
High squeaky voice.
So, but see, we imagine God using the best, the strongest, the biggest, the fastest, the most beautiful, the most handsome, the most whatever. But what God typically does is take something and that it surprises someone. Like, who would have thought that this person, that David, little David, could beat this big giant? Who would have thought that, you know, this Moses, who couldn't speak, would deliver the greatest sermons of all time to the people of Israel before they go in? Who would have thought that, you know, it goes on and on and on. It's almost always the unexpected where you give the glory to God, and you ultimately look at it and you go, well, there's no way. I know that has to be God because I knew Ross 30 years ago, and that what, you know, or, you know, any one of us. God can take something that's totally unexpected and change drastically.
And that doesn't necessarily have to be miraculous. Getting back to
It
some
take
of what
time.
you're saying, it was training.
That's it.
Think about training.
Yep.
You know, you train to do this, you train to do that. We see that in Israel to this day. They've been training a while.
Yep.
You know, and we can see some of the benefits of that. So
Right.
that falls into the if. You know, if you do this, if you
Yep.
do that, well, if the military tell you that too, right?
Right.
If you obey, and if you do these things right, you will train to be
That's a good point.
blessing everybody else. You know?
Training is important because, and it goes along with Deuteronomy, what Dave is saying. It's not magic. You're not going to be the holy people magically, like because I said, you're the holy people. No, you have to listen. You have to learn, which is part of the training and development. You have to guard, and you have to do. It's not just a matter of, like if somebody says, well, I'm the chosen, and I can do whatever I want to do. And, you know, it's like when I was at Eish Gutzion, we went to this place in what is now called the West Bank. And this Army colonel said, there's a passage in the Hebrew Bible after Jonathan and Saul are killed on the battlefield. And David, in a lament, because he's lost his love, his friend, Jonathan, he says, teach the children of Judah to use the bow and arrow. This is the colonel's translation. It says the bow. And he goes, teach the children of Judah to use the bow and arrow. And he said, my job as a commander in the Israeli Defense Force is to teach the children of Judah to use the bow and arrow. Now we use guns. But his point was, it's not magic. We have to train our people to defend this land. He said David realized that in that ancient time, in the land of Israel, we're surrounded by enemies who want to kill us. So the way we're going to populate this place and teach God's way is to defend it. We have to learn to fight. We have to learn these things. And so our faith also requires training. You know, the faith is easy in terms of acceptance. If any of us say, I want to follow God's way, you're in. You're in. You don't have to know everything yet. If you raise your hand and say, Yehovah, I want to attach myself to you, you're in. But you have to learn. Now, Miriam asked the question, do we have the ability or whatever to, I'm paraphrasing her question, to kind of backslide and come back, and that's evident in Scripture and in our own lives.
Once chosen, always chosen.
Right? Yeah, you can get off the path.
How does that work?
You can get off the path, but getting back on the path is bringing that back around. It's like a relationship that people grow apart over time, maybe. And can that be restored? It's not easy, and sometimes it isn't, but it is possible. You know, I've read a lot of books on different things, and, you know, a lot of times in relationships, what people say is that the problem is that we don't listen. You know, we just, you know, or we
get discouraged.
There was a quote that I remember about being chosen. Many are called, but few are chosen.
Yeah.
Because so few choose God's ways.
Yeah.
They want to do, but they want to do it their own way.
Yeah.
They want to do it God's way.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. And I think on that falling away, coming back thing, I think you're right on. It can, if there's a pattern there of continually trying to come back, I think it's harder because your heart can be hardened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it just seems like that could be a danger. You know?
Well, and it's the case even in the biblical literature where God's people continually backslid. They continually went away from His way. And there were times, even in this Torah reading, where Moses relates that God told him, look, this people, I'm going to wipe them out and start over with you. I'm going to just start the whole thing over. And Moses intercedes and says, whoa, wait a minute. If you do that, then the people that are watching, and there are people watching, right? They're going to say that you, God, weren't able to bring the people of Israel in and rescue them. So let's not do that. And God said, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's paraphrased, but the idea is that people can intercede because God ultimately does know our frame, as He puts it. You know, in Genesis 6 even, where He says, I know that man is flesh. So people like David is called a man after God's own heart. he commits a horrible series of crimes. But he still longed for God. And Psalm 51 is a great example of that. When he recognizes that he's done something bad, he turns back to God and God restores him. Please, he says, don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore my soul. How many times does David use that phrase, restore my soul? It's like, don't depart from me. Our existence, our very longevity, not only in the faith, but in this human walk, is to have that tether to God. And that's the idea of set your love on me. I mean, think about that. I want you to pray that. That phrase, understanding the Hebrew chashak after my class, it's a lifeline. We need that lifeline. We have to be connected to God in a real way. And you ought to think about it in your daily activities, when you're at the store, when you can't drop your guard. You can't have a sticker, bumper sticker that says, United Israel World Union, I love the Lord, and then you're flipping people off in traffic.
Right.
You know, I mean, I don't mean to be crude, but you see what I'm saying. Have you ever seen honk if you love Jesus and they're honking and cussing you out? You know, it's like, it's not a good example.
Poking in traffic, holding everybody up.
Yeah, you need to get in the right lane, right, Dave?
Yeah, you gotta get in the right.
Don't text and drive. Yeah.
What I love about this teaching today is it answers a few questions on how to answer those people, my acquaintances, even friends, who, when they find out I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
Yep.
some of them are atheists, some of them are agnostic. When I was in Christianity, you wouldn't even think of associating with people that didn't adhere to the same things.
Yeah.
So this, I've even had acquaintances tell me, I'm so sick of hearing of Zionism and all this. Well, you did point out that's a choice. And
That's right.
There's no sense in trying to convince or defend or anything to those people with that mindset. However, some people I love, I want to intercede that maybe if I am walking with Jehovah, maybe there's something that can speak to their heart in their day of trouble or however he chooses to do it.
Yeah.
That was what is good about this lesson, is answering within my own heart
Yeah.
those questions about when people bring up these issues in the world. And I think even anciently, Israel had to go through the same thing. It's like you're surrounded with people who doubt, you're surrounded with paganism, you're surrounded with idolatry, you're surrounded by people who are violent and selfish and don't worship the one true God.
Yep.
So, I see it in this day too.
Right. We may not, I would love for all my friends and family to have the joy that I have. It doesn't mean that there aren't times of sadness and mourning and bad, and we ought to remember people like that. But here's a good example. If I have friends that don't believe any of this, that I truly value. I love them. And I have people in my family that probably think I'm a little bit crazy. But what I want them to know is that I will present for them a very optimistic view of life. To some, it's even unrealistic, But it's very optimistic. I'm generally pretty happy, and I want them to have the same. But I can't convince them. But what I can do is be a consistent example. So when I have people, my family or friends who don't believe like I do, when they encounter a troublesome time, I have seen it again and again where they call me and say, hey, would you mind praying for me about this? And I always say, absolutely. I don't ask details, I don't have to say, well, what happened? Tell me what happened. It doesn't. If they want me to know, they'll tell me. But generally, I'll even stop them and say, look, you don't have to tell me all the details, because the God that I serve, and I'll tell them just like this, the God that I serve knows everything. So look, if you need prayer, I'm on it. I promise you, I'm going to pray for you. We ought to present our faith and our walk in such a way that people go, I've had somebody say, I don't believe in God, but if I did, I'd want to believe in Him like you believe in it. Because you want to present it in such a way You know, it's just, but look, let's face it. There are people that I know that I value that they don't think like I do.
Right.
But I look at them and I think, man, I wish you had what I have. But, you know, we can still be a good example, and that's the key. We've got a hard task because they're watching. You know, they really are watching. People love a bad news story. What's the old saying? A lie will make its way around the world while truth is getting its boots on. You know?
A friend of mine once said that a lie well told and executed will always be more believed than the truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so will negativity. Look, we live in a world that is torn, in the U.S. in particular, it is torn to pieces because all people focus on is what the president said or what his enemy said, depending on which side you balance out on. I really stay out of that fray, and I get a lot of accusation about that. People are like, you need to make your play. No, I don't. Not unless you just want me to satisfy your view. What I do is I stay out of all that. I could care less what somebody tweets.
Right.
I mean, if it's not about Jehovah, I probably don't care anyway. And, you know, people can be critical of me of that, but I pray for all of our leaders. And, you know, it's like another line from Fiddler on the Roof. Remember the guys get up to the rabbi and they say, is there a prayer for the czar? And he said, a prayer for the czar. And then he begins to pray the prayer for the czar, and he says, you know, King of the universe, or however he puts it, please keep the czar. And they all look at him, and he said, away from us. You know, and that's a good prayer. So if you don't believe in the politics of the day, people feel obligated to put their opinion on Twitter and Facebook, and like they're going to change something.
Or in their prayers.
Or in their prayers, yeah. So you maintain consistency and live your life in such a way that ultimately, I mean, what would it be like if one day in the U.S. none of this was covered and they only talked about the good deeds that people are doing? One day in the news. One day. You know how many good stories are going on? An optimistic day. You know, think about the power in that.
People are hungry for that. You see this example of the little guy that helped the autistic guy in Rouse's. That's going
I saw that.
worldwide.
I saw. Has it really?
And they've raised over what, $90,000 for the kid that
Wow.
was helpful to go to college.
Wow.
It's people are just hungry for
Yep.
good news
Yep.
and good examples. And
Yeah, when we're surrounded by negativity, when we're surrounded by darkness, when we're surrounded by bad, be the good. Be the good news. Make somebody happy. It goes back to the idea, I may not be able to change the world, but I might be able to change somebody's world.
Can't feed everybody, feed one person.
Feed that person, you know. Yeah, that's right. And
your comment that about associating yourself and being in the company of those, say, that don't believe or in a place much different than you. Our light shines so that those in the darkness can find their way to the light. You're not shining the light for those that are standing beside you.
that's right. That's right. You know, it's there's a story that I read in Hertz's commentary. You were talking about Hertz, Mark, and it's a story about a rabbi who carried a torch with him, but he was blind. And someone asked him, and they said, "Why are you carrying that torch? You can't see whether it's light or dark." And he said, "The torch isn't for me." See, that's our idea, is that we may be blind as the next guy, but the light that we carry comes from another source, and it's for another purpose. So to your point, Pam, we have to be a light, and we have to carry a light with us. It's demanded, it's required, and it's good for humanity. It's good for those around us.
right to the nation.
There are not a lot of days where I feel down. In fact, I can say, thankfully, that I don't have many. But there are other people who struggle with depression and things they're dealing with. And next,
Anxiety.
it could be me at some point. So I'm not lifting myself. I'm just saying. But my goal is to try to help those, and you have to help those, because any given moment it could be us. You know, the person who's suffering of loss or depression or just sadness, when we're in a place to help and encourage, we ought to, because we're going to want them to do the same for us when we need it. That's what we're here for. It really does come down to a relationship with God that we transfer to other people. That God, in His benevolence, has done good. He causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Right? So they get the blessings whether or not they earned them, but God is good. And our goal is to present God that way, I think.
All right, so you got the national versus the individual idea here, and I know that a nation is made up of people, individuals. So that's a given right there. So I'm not Jewish, I'm not an Israeli, but I can still volunteer. I can join.
Yep.
And in that aspect, I become part of this chosen nation. So I guess my question is, what if you can you be chosen and not be part of that nation? And then that's the end of that statement. And then another one is that within that nation, we see in the scriptures people that are chosen to do specific jobs. David, Moses, and these guys were chosen from birth. You know, pretty much in the womb, as Jeremiah was saying. But so, as an ex-Gentile, I guess I could say, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I have to look.
You who were formerly Gentiles.
Yeah. So you have to join the nation of Israel basically to be part of this chosen nation. So where's that leave you in conversion? You know, and I know one's a religion, one's a this.
Well, no.
That's where I'm confused.
No. It's great. No, it's good. It's a good point. So here's something that I brought on in the class that I'll highlight now. Exodus 19, after Sinai, there is the conditional promise, if, and it says ultimately that they will be a goy kadosh, a holy nation. All right? And that implies some ethnicity and so forth. This first point. When we think of Israel, we're talking about a people that is made up of the handmaids. Where are they even from? Where is Jacob's wives from? There's mixture there. You know, I mean, first of all, it's not like we tend to think about it. You know, they all have different moms, and, you know, you got that going. Well, what we get in Deuteronomy is a way to become part of Am Kadosh, the people, just a people. And I think that it's significant because what I tried to show today was you have the Segulah, the special treasure, you have the chosen, you have the word nation, you have people. All of these words come together that by the time you get to Malachi, Malachi is talking about a group of people who will attach themselves because their association with the one God, just like in Isaiah. It doesn't say if you're a part of the people of Israel. It's talking about if you're a stranger. If you're a stranger and you attach yourself to the covenant, you're in. In fact, he says, I'll give them a place higher than sons and daughters. So the goal is, it's how do I become part of the Am Kadosh, the holy people? And you don't have to change. A leopard can't change his spots. You don't have to become another ethnicity. God has people in every nation which are good and just and righteous and holy. And that's evident. Some of our greatest biblical heroes, take it back to Noah.
Right.
You know,
you're light to other nations. That means those other nations have light in them.
Isn't
maybe or not. Yeah.
ethnicity, if you will? Isn't that a contrivance of man?
What?
In other words, ethnic diversion. That's just a contrivance of man. When God made man, He made man. He didn't say, okay, you guys
Got these
are
other guys.
Israelis and you guys are Russians and you guys are Norwegian. No, that's not how it happens.
Well, in a sense,
It's just all people.
in a way, they all trace back. We all humanity traces back to Adam and Hava, Adam and Eve. And then if you take it forward, all people trace back to Noah. Everybody, according to the biblical narrative.
Right.
And so we're all related. Malachi also says, have we not all one Father? You know, it's like God is the God of all people. Whether they acknowledge that God or not, He still is the God of all people. And our goal then is to represent His way so that everyone around us says, hey, what church do you go to? That's the one we get, you know, or what religion are you, or what, you know, and you tell, well, it's biblical, you know, and then you open up that conversation. But generally, I think it's better when people recognize our behaviors and our actions and want to emulate that because it seems to be right. It seems to be good and just and holy. A lot of people claim a certain denomination or a religious affiliation, and that doesn't really, I don't think that matters nearly as much to God as that inward point. You know, someone posted a little while ago, I think it was Jodell, about God looks at the heart. You know, man looks at the outside, God looks at the heart. It's this idea we talked about today. Deuteronomy 10:16, Deuteronomy 30, verse 6 talks about a circumcision of the heart. This is a circumcision that only God can see. That doesn't mean that others can't. So it is, in a sense, all these designations and divisions are caused by man. But generally, God has selected a particular people to be a model of the way which will lead to blessing to all people. I mean, look, ideally, when you get to passages that are prophetic, like Zechariah 14, everybody will be going, or should be, you got a choice even then, to send delegates to Jerusalem to worship Jehovah, the King, the Lord of hosts. Those that don't get rain. So go easy, you know, however you want it. You want it or you don't want rain. What do you want? Send a delegate to worship. But I think that we are in a time when the modern world that we live in, to a large degree, does not favor the nation of Israel. And there are a lot of people who have a very negative assessment of Israel, and Israel is trying in its own secular fashion, many religious people are helping at this, they're trying to model a way where they're helping the nations to bring blessing through medical advances and technological advances, and in the military sense, they're
Being able to stay alive.
struggling just to make ends.
Making fresh water.
Yeah,
Making fresh water.
yeah, that's right. In a desert,
You don't need rain, but you don't want.
growing vegetation and feeding nations around them that are hungry. There's a lot of aid that goes to Africa. Israel just launched an initiative through the internet to help the people of Iran with water, and of course the leadership attacked. But there are a lot of people out there, good, honest people who just want to raise their family. They may be Muslim, they may be whatever their religion is, but they recognize the goodness.
Yes.
See,
That's what we need to do. We ought to be exuding goodness.
to the point of when they refused Israel, they put the plans, as I understand it, put the plans for the desalinization units, you know, for reverse osmosis to make fresh water out on the internet. So that, okay,
Yep.
if you want to take it from us directly, go to the internet and do it yourself.
That's right. That's right.
So
that's what this is
that's
about.
Going some.
With to whom much is given, much is required. If a group identifies as chosen, as that segula, as that special treasure, as the people of holiness, they ought to act accordingly. And that is a challenge for each of us. It's a challenge for me day to day. Am I looking for opportunities to do good? And I think that's what we all ought to do. It doesn't mean that we're perfect in that Greek Hellenized fashion. We all make mistakes. We say things we shouldn't say. We do things we shouldn't do. We're not always the best example. But the idea is to keep it at the forefront of your mind, to live in such a way that we walk in such a way, ultimately, that others will say, what a wise and understanding people this is. I mean, that's a big challenge, but it's incumbent on each of us to seek to live our lives in that way. So, I think that about wraps up today, guys, and it is good to see a table full of people.
In case you don't get it in the bulletin, next Saturday, after we do our roundtable, hopefully a little bit shorter,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring the popcorn popper and the movie for anybody that wants to watch
You don't see a movie.
the remake of Ben-Hur.
I don't think we can rebroadcast.
Yeah, we might not be able to broadcast it for
Won't be able to,
certain.
but anybody that's available can come here and watch the
Camera on the
movie.
audience, as long as we don't show the movie.
And let them watch us eating popcorn. So we're going to do that next Saturday. So what we'll do is, if you're here, if you can join us this coming Saturday, we would love to have you if you're within driving distance. We got a movie afternoon
And popcorn.
and popcorn right here and admission is
Free.
free. How about that?
You don't even have to be Hebrew.
That's right. You're welcome to come watch the movie and eat popcorn. So hopefully some of you can do that and join us.
Word, you can choose to
Jodelle, look, I just looked down. Jodelle said she's coming. All we had to do was offer popcorn and a movie, and Jodelle all of a sudden is willing to come make the short trip. Jerry's coming. Look at that.
Oh, my goodness.
Jerry, is that popcorn on the keto?
That's right. We'll do whatever we need to do to get you in.
Keto's next.
Don't look at what I used to make it is.
All right. So thank you, John. That sounds good. So we look forward to next Shabbat. Hopefully you can join us here at the UI Center South. And thank you for taking your time this Sabbath, and hope you have a blessed week. And for choosing to be chosen, the dialogue of the chosen. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Right here, same time, same channel.